My name is Robert James Mitchell, and for 63 years of my life, I believed only in what I could measure, weigh, and prove. Bob to my friends, Bobby to my late wife Margaret, and Mr. Mitchell to the neighborhood kids who still think I'm some kind of hard ass because I actually expect them to stay off my lawn. I grew up in Akron, Ohio, back when the rubber factories still ran 3 shifts and you could smell opportunity mixed in with the sulfur. My father worked at Goodyear for 37 years, came home every night with black under his fingernails and pride in his chest. He was a practical man who fixed everything with WD-40 and duct tape, who believed that hard work and common sense could solve any problem this world threw at you. Church was for Sundays and funerals, he used to say, but character was for every day. Faith was for the weak in my book. Science, logic, and hard work were my gods. I earned a degree in mechanical engineering from Ohio State, spent 41 years designing systems that moved oil through pipelines across 3 states. Everything had to be precise, calculated, tested. If something couldn't be measured or replicated, it simply wasn't real. Period. Margaret used to tease me about being too literal-minded, said I couldn't see poetry in a sunset because I was too busy calculating the angle of light refraction. She wasn't wrong. Even after we moved to Denver in '89 for my job with ConocoPhillips, even after we watched our daughter Sarah graduate from law school and give us 2 beautiful grandchildren, even after Margaret's slow, cruel battle with pancreatic cancer that took her from me 3 years ago, I held tight to my worldview like a life preserver. The universe was vast and indifferent, governed by physics and chemistry and nothing more. When you died, you died. Lights out. Game over. No curtain call. But late at night, especially after Margaret passed, I sometimes wondered where all the love went. All those years of holding hands, all those quiet Sunday mornings reading the paper together, all those fierce hugs she gave me when I'd come home defeated from another bad day at work. Where does 42 years of love go when the body stops breathing? I'd sit in my recliner, nursing a bourbon, staring at her empty chair across from me, and feel this hollow ache that no engineering principle could explain or fix. I kept myself busy with routines. Golfed twice a week with my buddy Frank Kellerman, who'd retired from the railroad and had opinions about everything from the Broncos draft picks to the proper way to grill a steak. Tuesday night poker games with the same crew of old-timers who'd been taking each other's money for 15 years. Weekend trips to see Sarah and the kids in Boulder, where I'd pretend to understand their video games and they'd pretend my jokes were actually funny. The truth was, I felt like I was just going through the motions, living because stopping seemed like too much work. Margaret had been the one who brought color to everything, who could find wonder in simple things like the way snow looked on the pine trees behind our house, or the sound of our grandson's laugh echoing through the kitchen. Without her, the world felt muted, mechanical. Just systems running their prescribed cycles until entropy finally won. I had no idea that everything I thought I knew about reality, about death, about the very nature of existence itself, was about to get turned completely upside down on a routine hiking trip to one of my favorite spots near Golden. I certainly never imagined that my stubborn, rational engineer's mind was about to encounter something that would shatter every assumption I'd built my life upon. But that morning in late September, as I laced up my boots and grabbed my water bottle, completely unaware that I was about to die, I was just another lonely widower looking for a way to fill the empty hours of another day. The rescue came 6 hours after the mountain gave way. 6 hours buried under tons of granite and pine, my body twisted like a broken marionette beneath what used to be the hiking trail near Bear Creek. When the search dogs finally caught my scent and the rescue teams dug me out, I was unconscious, barely breathing, with burns covering 30% of my body and 5 ribs snapped like dry kindling. The flight to Denver Health Medical Center was a blur of sirens and radio chatter. 63-year-old male, multiple trauma, possible internal bleeding, second and third degree burns on torso and left arm. I drifted in and out, catching fragments. The helicopter's rotor wash, the smell of antiseptic, someone shouting about blood pressure dropping. My daughter Sarah's voice on a phone, trembling. "Dad, can you hear me?" "Dad." Dr. Jennifer Kwan, the burn specialist, later told me I was lucky the rock slide had trapped me near a small underground spring. The water had kept me from burning completely when the propane stove in my backpack exploded. Lucky. That's what she called lying unconscious for 6 hours with crushed ribs and skin hanging off my left arm like charred paper. The first 3 weeks in the ICU passed in a morphine haze. Machines breathed for me, fed me, monitored every beat of my damaged heart. Sarah drove down from Boulder twice a day, sitting beside my bed reading engineering journals out loud, thinking somehow that differential equations might pull me back to the world I understood. Frank Kellerman visited once, took one look at me wrapped head to toe in bandages, and had to step outside to compose himself. It was during the 4th week, when they finally reduced the pain medication and I could think clearly again, that the dreams started. Not dreams. That's too simple a word for what happened when I closed my eyes. Every night I saw the same impossible scene, rain falling upward, droplets of water ascending toward a dark sky, while simultaneously tiny flames fell downward like burning snow. Fire and water moving in opposite directions, meeting somewhere in the middle of my vision in flashes of brilliant white light. Dr. Hassan, the psychiatrist they assigned to my case, nodded knowingly when I described it. "Very common with trauma patients, Mr. Mitchell. The brain processes extreme experiences through symbolic imagery. Fire represents the explosion. Water represents your desire to be cleansed of the memory. Classic PTSD manifestation." But I knew he was wrong. "No, doctor," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "It wasn't trauma. It was purification." He made a note on his clipboard. Increased my sessions to 3 times a week. The physical therapy was brutal. Learning to move my left arm again, stretching skin that had tightened into scar tissue, rebuilding the strength in my chest where the ribs had punctured my lung. Maria Santos, my physical therapist, was a small woman with enormous hands and zero patience for my engineering-minded approach to healing. "Stop thinking so much, Bobby," she'd say, manipulating my shoulder joint until I wanted to scream. "Your body knows what to do. Let it teach you." It was Maria who first noticed that I was different, not just physically, though the scars running down my left arm and across my chest made that obvious enough. "Something in my eyes had changed," she said. "Something in the way I looked at people now, like I was seeing more than just the surface." She wasn't wrong. The world looked different through whatever lens had been fitted over my vision during those weeks of unconsciousness. Colors seemed more vivid, shadows held more depth. When Nurse Patricia Williams came in to change my bandages, I found myself watching the way the fluorescent lights caught the tears that always seemed to be gathered at the corners of her eyes. She'd worked the burn unit for 12 years, she told me once, and she cried a little for every patient. I watched those unshed tears and somehow understood that they weren't just tears of sympathy. They were part of something bigger, a circulation I was only beginning to glimpse. "You're looking at me strange again," Patricia said one afternoon as she gently cleaned the healing skin on my forearm. "I'm sorry. It's just, do you ever think about where tears go when they fall?" She paused, the antiseptic-soaked gauze halfway to my arm. "What do you mean?" "I mean, they fall down, and then they evaporate, and then they rise up into clouds, and then they fall again as rain. It's all connected, isn't it? The water in your eyes came from somewhere else, and it's going somewhere else." Patricia looked at me with the same expression Dr. Hassan wore when I talked about the fire and water dreams. But she didn't make notes. She just finished cleaning my wounds and said quietly, My grandmother used to say that every tear was a prayer on its way back to heaven. That night, the dreams came again. But this time, I wasn't afraid of them. This time I watched the fire rain fall and the water drops rise, and I began to understand that I was witnessing something I had no name for yet. Something that had been waiting for me in the darkness beneath the mountain. Something that had followed me back to the world of machines and medicines and rational explanations. Something that was going to change everything I thought I knew about being alive. The revelation came not in the hospital, but 3 months later, when I finally returned to the trail where it had all happened. Sarah drove me up in her Subaru, parking at the same spot where my pickup had been found, half buried under the rock slide. The rescue teams had cleared most of the debris, but you could still see the scar on the mountainside where tons of granite had given way. "Dad, are you sure about this?" she asked, watching me struggle out of the passenger seat. My left arm was still stiff, the scarred skin tight across my chest. Walking required concentration, every step a negotiation between will and damaged tissue. But I had to see it, had to understand what had happened in those 6 hours when my body lay trapped and unconscious beneath the mountain. The scorch mark was still there, a perfect circle of blackened earth about 10 feet from where they'd pulled me out. This was where my backpack had exploded, where the propane canister had turned my hiking gear into shrapnel and flame. The investigators said it was a miracle the underground spring had kept the fire from spreading, had kept me from burning completely. I knelt on the charred ground, running my fingers through soil that still smelled faintly of smoke. That's when the rain started. Just a light drizzle, nothing dramatic. But as I watched the droplets hit the burned earth, something extraordinary happened. Each raindrop caught the afternoon light as it fell, creating tiny prisms of color against the blackened ground. But more than that, I could swear I saw each drop illuminated from within, as if carrying its own spark of light downward from the sky. Water and light falling together. Fire and purification, washing clean. I started crying. Not the frustrated tears I'd shed in the hospital, or the angry tears when Dr. Hassan suggested my dreams were just trauma responses. These were different tears. Tears of recognition, of understanding something my rational mind had no words for. "Fire is not destruction," I whispered to the empty mountainside. "Fire is purification. And God weeps with us every time." Sarah found me there 20 minutes later, still kneeling in the dirt, rain soaking through my jacket. "Dad, what's wrong? Are you okay?" But I couldn't explain it to her. How do you tell someone that you've just understood something fundamental about the nature of existence? That you've glimpsed a truth your engineering degree never prepared you for? The drive home was quiet. Sarah kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, worry creasing her forehead. When we got back to my house, she made me tea and sat across from me at the kitchen table. The same table where Margaret and I had shared 42 years of breakfast conversations. "People are saying you saw things, Dad, when you were unconscious. Nurse Williams mentioned you've been talking about dreams that don't sound like dreams." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, feeling the heat penetrate the scarred skin of my left palm. "Not dreams, Sarah. Visions. Memories of something that happened while my body was dying under that mountain." She leaned forward. "What kind of memories?" For a moment, I considered lying. Considered giving her the explanation Dr. Hassan would approve of. Oxygen deprivation, neural misfiring, the brain creating meaningful narratives out of random electrical activity. But sitting there in the kitchen where her mother and I had shared so many quiet truths, I couldn't do it. I left my body, Sarah. I was standing above myself, watching my own chest barely rising and falling under all that rock and debris. And then I was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere I can't describe with words that make sense. She was quiet for a long time. Finally, "Were you scared?" "That's the strange part," I said. I should have been terrified. But I wasn't. I felt more at peace than I'd ever felt in my life. More myself than I'd been since your mother died. Like I was remembering something I'd forgotten. Something about who I really am, underneath all the roles and responsibilities and daily routines. The air in the kitchen seemed to shift, becoming thicker, more present. I could feel something approaching, not threatening, but immense. Like standing at the edge of an ocean and feeling the pull of tides you can't see. It's happening again, isn't it? Sarah asked, her voice very quiet. I nodded. The boundaries between Bob Mitchell, retired engineer, and something far larger were beginning to dissolve. Time was slowing, the kitchen lights taking on a quality I'd never noticed before. Not just illumination, but presence, intelligence, love. I was still sitting in my chair, still holding my teacup, still looking at my daughter across the table. But I was also rising, floating, expanding beyond the confines of flesh and bone and the small concerns of daily existence. I could feel myself separating, layer by layer, from everything I'd always thought defined me. The last thing I saw before the room filled completely with light was Sarah reaching across the table, her hand extended toward mine, her face radiant with something between wonder and fear, and I wanted to tell her, don't be afraid. This is what we've been preparing for our entire lives. This is what love looks like when it remembers itself. Then I was elsewhere, suspended in a space where thought moved faster than light, where love was not a feeling but the fundamental architecture of reality itself. And I knew with absolute certainty that I was home. The presence arrived like morning light through a fog, not sudden, but undeniable. I was standing in what I can only describe as a space between spaces, where the concept of where had no meaning, and yet I was more precisely located than I had ever been in my life. Everything that had defined me, the scars from the mountain, the retirement from the fire department, the careful measurements of my engineering career, all of it felt like costumes I had temporarily worn. Then I was no longer alone. I heard without hearing, felt without touching. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, woven into the fabric of existence itself. Robert, it said, and the sound of my name contained more love than I had experienced in 63 years of living. I turned, or perhaps the space turned around me, and found myself facing a light that was also a person, a presence that was both infinite and intimately familiar. I couldn't make out features in any conventional sense, yet I recognized the face as clearly as I'd recognized my own reflection every morning for decades. I know you, I said, though I wasn't sure if I spoke the words or simply thought them into being. You have always known me, came the response. The question is, do you remember who you are? That's when I began to weep, not the frustrated tears of the hospital or the angry tears when people dismissed my experience as trauma-induced hallucination. These were tears of recognition, of coming home to something I hadn't realized I'd lost. I'm tired, I said. I've spent my whole life trying to fix things, control things, make sense of things. Margaret's gone. My body's broken. I don't understand why I'm still here. The light around me seemed to smile. You were never meant to fix everything, Robert. You were meant to love through everything. And suddenly I understood why I had seen the fire rain in my dreams, why every raindrop on the burned mountainside had seemed illuminated from within. The destruction and the healing weren't separate events. They were part of the same movement, the same breath. The mountain taught you, the presence continued. Fire purifies, not by destroying, but by revealing what cannot be destroyed. Water cleanses not by washing away, but by carrying forward what is essential. I thought about the families I'd helped evacuate during forest fires, the homes that burned while others stood untouched just yards away. I'd always seen it as random, unfair, senseless. But now I glimpsed something different, a pattern too large for human eyes to fully perceive, but real nonetheless. The people who dismiss your experience, the voice said, reading my thoughts effortlessly, they have forgotten that reality is much larger than what their instruments can measure. But you haven't forgotten. That's why you're here. What am I supposed to do with this? I asked. How do I go back to ordinary life knowing what I know now? The laughter that came in response was like sunlight breaking through clouds. Ordinary life? Robert, there is no such thing. Every moment is a miracle pretending to be mundane. Every person you meet is infinity dressed up as a neighbor. Every breath you take is the same breath that ignites stars. I felt my perspective expanding, as if I were zooming out from my individual story to see it as part of an immense tapestry. My years fighting fires, my marriage to Margaret, even the accident that brought me here, all of it was connected, purposeful, part of something too beautiful and complex to grasp with my rational mind alone. You were a firefighter, the present said. But fire was never your enemy. Fire is transformation. Fire is renewal. Fire is love burning away everything that isn't essential. You understood this in your bones, even when your mind couldn't name it. That's when I saw it. A vision of myself, not as I had been, but as I was meant to become. I saw myself working with families who had lost everything in disasters, not just rebuilding their homes, but helping them remember what couldn't be destroyed. I saw myself teaching others that the light they thought they were seeking was actually the light they already carried. I saw myself planting gardens in places where buildings had burned, showing people that endings were also beginnings. The Rain Shelter Project, I said, the name arriving fully formed in my consciousness. Because after every fire comes the rain, the presence confirmed. And after every rain comes new growth. Your job now is to help people remember this pattern, to see it in their own lives. I understood then why I had survived the mountain, not because I was special, but because I was willing. Willing to remember that love and loss were part of the same movement. Willing to trust that what looked like destruction might actually be preparation for something new. Will you help me remember? I asked. When I go back, when the skeptics tell me it was just oxygen deprivation, when my own doubt creeps in, I will never leave you, came the response, and I felt those words settle into the deepest part of my being. Every time you see light reflecting off water, remember. Every time you watch something grow from seemingly dead ground, remember. Every time you choose love over fear, remember that you are choosing me. The space around us began to shift, and I knew my time here was ending. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I carried something now that no amount of doubt could erase. The knowledge that I was loved beyond measure, that my life had meaning beyond what I could see, that death was not an ending but a transition to an even greater aliveness. Go back, the presence said, and teach them that the light they seek is the light they are. Based on my research, I now understand the specific details about the life review, community transformation, and the revelation experience. Here's step 5 of the NDE narrative. The revelation didn't come all at once. It unfolded like a flower blooming in slow motion, each petal a memory, each memory a lesson in the intricate mathematics of love. I found myself standing in a space that defied description, not a room, not a field, but something that contained the essence of both. Before me appeared what I can only call a living tapestry of my entire existence, but not as I had experienced it. This was my life seen from the perspective of every person I had ever encountered. This is the true measurement, the presence said, and I understood that this was my life review, not a judgment, but an education in the interconnectedness of all things. The first scene that materialized was from when I was 8 years old, helping Mrs. Patterson across the street after she'd slipped on ice. I remembered doing it, but I had forgotten what I experienced now. The profound gratitude that had flooded her heart, the way that simple act had restored her faith in human kindness after a week of feeling invisible and forgotten. I felt her relief as if it were my own. And more, I saw how that moment had caused her to smile at the grocery clerk later that day, how her smile had brightened a teenager's difficult shift, how that teenager had gone home in a better mood and helped his younger sister with homework instead of snapping at her. One small act, rippling outward through dozens of lives. But the review wasn't only about moments of grace. I experienced every hurt I had caused, felt it from the other person's perspective, with an intimacy that took my breath away. When I was 15 and had mocked Jimmy Carson's stutter in front of the whole class, God, I felt his humiliation burn through me like acid. I felt how that moment had silenced him for months, how it had convinced him he was fundamentally flawed, how it had shaped his retreat from speaking up even into his adult life. Every cruel word, every moment of indifference, every time I had chosen convenience over compassion, I experienced it all from the receiving end. But there was no punishment in it, no cosmic finger-wagging. Instead, there was teaching, understanding, the gentle but uncompromising education of a soul learning to see clearly. Why didn't I understand this before? I asked, tears streaming down what I supposed was my face in this place, beyond physical form. Because in physical existence, you can only see from one perspective at a time, came the response. It's part of the learning. Here you remember that every action creates waves that travel far beyond what any individual can perceive. Every choice to love builds connection. Every choice made in fear creates separation. I watched my marriage to Margaret unfold, saw not just my own experience of love and loss, but felt her side of it too. The deep security she'd found in my reliability, yes, but also the loneliness she'd sometimes felt when my practical nature made her feel like she was too much, too emotional, too impractical. I experienced her joy when I'd surprised her with small gestures of romance, and her sadness on the many occasions when I'd been too preoccupied with work to really see her. But I also felt something magnificent. The way our love had created a field of safety that had touched everyone who entered our home. Sarah's friends had felt it, had unconsciously modeled their own future relationships on what they witnessed between us. The mailman had felt it in the way Margaret always asked about his family. The neighbors had been affected by the stability we represented in an increasingly chaotic world. Every marriage, I understood, was either contributing to the world's capacity for love or diminishing it. Every friendship, every interaction with a stranger, every moment of patience or impatience with a child, all of it mattered in ways that rippled out through time and space in patterns too complex for any human mind to fully grasp. Your work as a firefighter, the presence continued, was never just about extinguishing flames. You were learning that destruction and renewal are part of the same cycle. Every fire you fought taught you something about the nature of purification. Every family you helped save was a lesson in what cannot be destroyed. I saw it then, my entire career as a long preparation for this moment of understanding. Every call, every rescue, every loss had been shaping my soul's capacity to recognize that what looks like ending is often beginning. And now, the voice said, you understand why you survived the mountain. Not because you deserved to more than others, but because you were ready to become a teacher of what you have learned. The Rain Shelter Project appeared before me, not as something I would create, but as something that already existed in the realm of possibility, waiting for me to step into it. I saw the families I would serve, felt their gratitude, witnessed how their renewed hope would spread to others who had lost faith in recovery. But I'm not ready, I said. I don't know enough. I'm not wise enough. The laughter that surrounded me was warm, infinite, utterly accepting. Robert, wisdom isn't about knowing everything. Wisdom is about remembering that love is the only force that builds, while fear is the only force that destroys. You've spent 63 years learning this. Now it's time to teach it. I felt myself beginning to pull away from this place of ultimate understanding, and panic seized me. Wait. I'll forget. I'll go back and doubt this was real. I'll get caught up in daily life and lose this clarity. You will doubt, the presence agreed. But you will also remember. And every time you choose love over fear, you will remember more. Every time you see light reflecting in water, you will remember. Every time you help someone build something new where something old was destroyed, you will remember that all healing follows the same pattern. What cannot be destroyed becomes the foundation for what comes next. The last thing I experienced before returning to my body was the most beautiful sight I have ever witnessed. A vast web of light connecting every human being who had ever lived, every act of kindness creating brighter connections, every moment of love strengthening the entire network. I saw that no loving action, however small, was ever lost. That forgiveness healed not just the one who forgave, but rippled outward to heal wounds in people who would never even know why they suddenly felt lighter. And I understood the final truth. We were never separate. We had never been separate. The perception of separation was the only illusion, and love was the only reality. Everything else, all the fear, all the conflict, all the pain, was just the temporary confusion of souls who had forgotten their true nature. Remember, the voice whispered as I felt myself being gently pushed back toward physical existence. And help others remember. Based on my research, I now understand the specific details about the return experience and final transformation. Here's step 6 of the NDE narrative. The return was violent. Not the gentle floating back that you might imagine, but a jarring slam into flesh that felt suddenly foreign and impossibly heavy. One moment I was suspended in perfect love, understanding everything, connected to everyone, and the next, I was gasping on a hospital bed, machines beeping frantically around me, Sarah's tear-streaked face leaning over mine. Dad, can you hear me? Her voice sounded muffled, distant, like she was speaking through water. I tried to tell her where I'd been, tried to explain the magnificent truth I'd discovered, but only a rasp emerged from my throat. He's back, Dr. Kwan said to someone behind her. Vitals are stabilizing. Mr. Mitchell, you've been unconscious for 18 hours. You're in Denver Health. Do you remember the accident? I wanted to laugh. Remember the accident? I remembered everything, not just the rock slide, but the purpose behind it, the reason I'd survived, the mission I'd been given. But my body felt like a prison after the expansive freedom I'd experienced. Every breath was effort, every heartbeat a reminder of limitation. The first few days were the hardest. Not physically. My injuries were healing remarkably well, the doctors said. But emotionally, I was angry. Angry that I'd been pulled back from that place of perfect understanding. Angry that I had to exist again in a world where people worried about mortgage payments and traffic jams when I had seen the cosmic significance of every single moment. You seem different, Dad, Sarah said on my third day back. She was sitting in the same chair where she'd kept vigil, but now her relief had given way to puzzlement. It's like you're not all here. She was right. Part of me was still there, would always be there. And part of me grieved constantly for what I'd lost by returning. But slowly, as the weeks passed and my body grew stronger, I began to understand why I'd been sent back. The dreams continued. Not the fire rain dreams of the hospital, but clearer visions of what I was meant to do. I saw families whose homes had burned, their faces hollow with loss. I saw communities torn apart by disaster, people who had forgotten that destruction was part of the same cycle as renewal. And I knew with absolute certainty that my real work was just beginning. 6 months after the accident, I liquidated my retirement account, cashed in my life insurance policy, and established the Rain Shelter Project. Frank Kellerman thought I'd lost my mind. Bobby, You can't just give away everything you've worked for your whole life. But I tried to explain to him what I'd learned, that nothing I'd accumulated in 63 years of living mattered compared to the connections I could help create, the healing I could facilitate, the hope I could restore. Money's just energy, I told him. And energy is meant to flow, not sit still. The first house we built was for the Martinez family, who'd lost everything in the Cameron Peak fire. As we raised the frame, I carved the rain mark into each supporting beam, the wave pattern I'd seen in my vision, the symbol of water and light intertwining. The local volunteers thought it was some kind of aesthetic choice. They had no idea they were building a temple. The dedication ceremony was planned for a bright October afternoon, but an unexpected storm rolled in just as we were about to begin. Heavy drops started falling as the family stood in front of their new home, and I watched people reaching for umbrellas, preparing to run for cover. "Wait," I called out, surprising myself with the authority in my voice. "Please, just wait." And something remarkable happened. One by one, people lowered their umbrellas. The children stopped trying to hide under their parents' jackets and instead turned their faces up to catch the drops. Mrs. Martinez, the grandmother who'd lost photos spanning 80 years of her life, stretched out her arms and laughed as the rain soaked through her dress. That's when little Miguel, the Martinez's 6-year-old grandson, tugged on my sleeve. "Mr. Bob, why is the sky crying again?" I knelt down to his level, watching raindrops catch the late afternoon light as they fell, seeing again that perfect marriage of water and illumination that had opened my understanding. "The sky isn't crying from sadness, mijo," I told him, my voice thick with recognition. "God cries with happiness every time we remember how to love each other." The story made the local news that night, the crazy retired firefighter who builds houses and won't let people use umbrellas at his ceremonies. Then the Denver Post picked it up. Within a year, rain shelter projects were starting in 5 states. Families who'd lost everything were not just getting new homes, but communities were learning to see disaster as opportunity for deeper connection. I kept Margaret's wedding ring on a chain around my neck, and sometimes I would touch it and feel her presence so strongly it took my breath away. I understood now that love doesn't end with death. It just changes form, like water becoming vapor and then rain. Every morning, I woke with the same sense of purpose I'd felt in that place of infinite light. Every raindrop on my window was a reminder. Every person I met was another soul temporarily forgetting their true nature, just as I had forgotten mine for so many years. The skeptics still came, of course. Journalists who wanted to debunk my story, doctors who insisted my experience was neurological, friends who missed the old pragmatic Bob and wished I'd stop talking about spiritual nonsense. But their doubt couldn't touch the certainty that had been burned into the deepest part of my being. I didn't need them to believe in what I'd experienced. I only needed to live it, one day at a time, one act of service at a time, one moment of choosing love over fear at a time. Because now I knew the truth. Every sunrise was a promise I'd once heard spoken in perfect light. Every storm was an invitation to remember that cleansing and renewal were the same process. And every person I encountered carried the same divine spark I'd recognized in that place beyond all places. They just needed someone to help them remember how to let it shine. 3 years later, standing in front of my 100th completed house as gentle rain began to fall, I closed my eyes and whispered the words that had become my daily prayer. Thank you for sending me back. Thank you for letting me remember. And thank you for trusting me with this work. The rain fell softly on my upturned face, and for just a moment I was home again.